Hey, welcome back. My name's Chad Kennedy, and we're going to finish up this Ngombe Ngulu in this video. Now, all we've got left to do is some silver wire inlay and to glue this thing together. So let's get started. The first thing that I do whenever I start my inlay is that I will draw out a pattern on a piece of paper of the knife handle or the sword handle, whatever it is that you're going to inlay. And I'm going to trace out and experiment with different designs and see what looks best with the shape of the handle. Sometimes that's real easy and sometimes it's real hard. This one, for some reason, came real easy. I didn't have to sketch it but just a few times. You can see on my sketch pad over there I've got a few different drawings. I tried some different things, but ultimately I went back with just some scroll work, and now all I'm doing is transferring what I did on paper onto the knife handle, which is a lot harder than it seems. You'll see me erase and start over again. Some of the things that I'm doing is changing the contours. Sometimes you'll see flat spots because the grain will grab your pencil and make it want to follow the straight lines of the grain instead of the curved line that you're trying to make on the knife handle. So you have to erase and sometimes look at things from different angles. It's just playing with it, but drawing it on the handle exactly like you want it to be is really important. Another thing about making your sketch is to draw your pattern of your handle on your paper slightly smaller than it is in real life, because it's really hard once the handle starts to curve on this piece right here, like on the left and the right. Once it starts making that hard curve, it's really hard to make that inlay follow that curve. So the area that you have to inlay is actually smaller than the two-dimensional size of the handle that you see when you look down and when you trace. All right, now once I finish up this drawing, I'm going to move on to the actual inlaying. The first thing that I'm going to do when I start inlaying is I'm going to start on the main scroll, which is the biggest and the longest scroll that you've got. We're going to go ahead and fast forward through some of this because it's really slow. One thing I will say, I've got another video on here about inlaying, but I really just use two chisels. I have a real small one and one that's a little bit bigger. I haven't had a whole lot of luck with any that are much bigger or much smaller than those two, so I just stick with them. When the scroll's pretty tight, which I'm still using what I call my number one chisel here, it's the smallest one, and once I kind of break over the top of this scroll, I'll go ahead and advance and start using my number two chisel, which is a little bit flatter. It's almost twice as wide, so it lets you cover about twice the ground. And once it starts getting into a tight scroll again, then I'll switch back to my number one. Once I finish chiseling the first channel, I'll preform the wire as I put it in, as you can see right here. That allows me to not have to worry about trying to make that really tight turn bit by bit with the wire. It's still fairly difficult, but you know, it definitely makes your wire look a lot prettier if you go ahead and form that contour before you try tapping it in there. Once you get it started, the rest is fairly easy as long as you've chiseled your entire channel is the same depth all the way. Then all you have to worry about is that last end of the scroll, getting it formed like you want it. And another important thing is cutting it off at the right spot. This orange set of pliers I got here are they're actually Crescent brand. Our Home Depot sells them, and they're a flush cut plier, and that helps a lot for gauging where exactly you're cutting your wire off. Now when it comes to tapping the wire in, I tap mine almost all the way in. I know some guys don't, but I go ahead and tap mine almost flush with the surface. And then I'll move on to my other pieces. Now every piece that we add to this side from now on is going to have to be tapered. So I'm hammering it out on my vise here. That's going to taper the end, and it's also going to spread it out on the width. So you need to cut off how it's flared out. If you forge this, it'd be the same thing. You beat something right on the end, it's going to flare it out and also taper it down. So you cut off the excess to where it looks like a square piece of wire again, and that's going to allow the wire to look like it just basically started from nothing and grew out of your main scroll. These cats are super annoying, man. You throw them on the floor and they just get right back. Excuse them. Anyway, you're dealing with an 8/1000 thick piece of wire here. So whenever you taper it down, it tapers down to almost nothing. And that's really important because these scrolls that are coming out of other scrolls, you want them to look like they're actually growing out of them. And so when it's basically starting from nothing up to 80/1000, it looks great. And these areas that have a lot of scrolls, it looks cool when you can't tell where one starts and the other stops. Here's a little closer look at an area that's got 5 different pieces of wire in one area, and you can't tell where all of them start from. So that's what you're going for, and it's going to get even better when we file this thing down at the end. Now from here on out, it's going to be a lot of the same processes over and over. It's going to be little pieces of wire, flaring out the ends, trimming them off, preforming part of the scroll, and then tapping it down in, and making sure you stay up close and tight to the other scroll. One more thing I want to talk about is how I get ready to set my pins. One of the most important parts about doing this inlay is getting your pins in the right spot. If you get them too far to the end, you know, it doesn't look good. It looks like you have a piece of wire and then you have a ball just kind of haphazardly on the end. If you get it too far this way on the inside of the curl, then you kind of have a flat spot out here. So you want to make sure that you put it right in the middle of the end of the wire. I use a little center punch that I've sharpened the end to make my pilot holes, and so I'll do this on every little inlay curl that I've got here, and then I'll come back and drill my holes. But I'll push down pretty hard with this, that way my drill bit knows exactly where to go. Now I'll push every single one of them, and then I'll go back and I'll drill only the size hole that I'm about to put that size wire in. So I'll start off with the larger size wire that I use, which I believe is a 14 gauge. And you can use a 1/16 drill bit or a 1 under 1/16 drill bit for that. Drill all those holes, put all those pieces of wire in, then I'll start my next one. That way you don't ever have to worry about getting confused at what size wire goes in what size hole. You do all of one size, then move on to the next size. Another really important thing to remember while you're drilling these holes is that if your scroll is running in a counterclockwise direction, you need to run your drill in a counterclockwise direction. The reason for that is that you don't want that drill bit to grab the end of that scroll and try pulling it out. So you want your drill bit to flow in the direction that that scroll is ending. That way you never have to worry about it actually grabbing the wire. Now when it comes to placing the pins in, you want to cut them long enough and also want to sharpen the end of each pin. That way it'll sink down in the wood real good. Also use a small pair of needle nose pliers to hold it because you don't want it wobbling around, you know, like a nail going down in a hole. You don't want it to bend off to one side because that can really mess you up. Another little tip is to get you like a weekly pill counter like what I've got here and keep all your pins separated. Also label the tops, and also keep your drill bit that goes with that size pin in there, and that way you never mess up and accidentally drill the wrong size or pick up the wrong pin. You do all one size at one time. Another thing that I do is make my pins plenty long, that way they're sticking up when I'm done, and then I'll cut them all off flush. You definitely don't want the pins to go past flush and be sunk down in the wood, because then you got to do a lot of filing and you'll risk filing away all your inlay. Now that I've got all my silver set, it's time to file it flush. What I'm using here is a single direction cut file that's got real fine teeth, and I'm going to start off really slow and not much pressure at all. You just want to graze across all that silver until you can start getting it kind of smoothed off on the top, especially those pins, which have a sharp point from where you cut them. You don't want the file to grab that. So go real easy and real light, working one section at a time until you get it all flush. Now that I've got all the silver flush, I'm going to finish this out just like I would any other handle. And since I was cutting with a file, I'm going to go to a 120 grit to try to take out all those cut marks. And then I'll just progress through the grits just like I would any other handle. You can see I've got a wood block as backing. Especially on these heavier grits, you don't want to just use your fingers because it'll take the wood away and leave that silver really high. So use something to back your sandpaper. Now I've got the inlay finished, it's time to apply several coats of true oil and then get this thing glued together. I usually do several coats of true oil, just really light coats, wipe them down, and you can see it leaves a really pretty finish. Another thing that I do is that I'll polish this with rotten stone, and I did not take a video of that. I'm going to do that in a future video, but you can see it leaves a really pretty glass finish on it. When I get ready to glue the guard on, I like to use JB Weld. It doesn't stick to your blade as easily, and it's a lot easier to clean off than something like epoxy. So for the guard, I use JB Weld, and I just smear it all around the tang and then press the guard on. It's not so much about holding the guard on as it is making a watertight seal between the blade and the guard. Now I'm going to let that set like it is for now. It'll take a while for that JB Weld to set up, and I'm going to go ahead and epoxy on the rest of the handle setup. So I'm putting a light layer of epoxy on the top side of the guard here, just to make sure that in between the handle and the guard it's sealed off really well. This is really light. I definitely don't want it squeezing out where you can see it, so just putting a little bit here, and then I'm going to pour the rest in from the top. I did a bad job of setting up the camera here, but basically all I'm doing is pouring epoxy in the hole in the top of the handle and then screwing everything together. So there's not a whole lot to see here. It's always a big relief once you've got it all glued up and everything looks the way that it's supposed to, especially when you've got all the parts finished and gluing is the last thing that you're going to do to it. This sword really was a joy to build. There's a lot of things on this that are not in my normal everyday knife making process. So I had a lot of fun with it. I really appreciate you watching it. Give me some likes or comments, or share this with somebody else. I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing to my channel. Just stay tuned and we'll see what we do next time. Thanks for watching.